Hey everyone, Rebel Jeff Jones here. It's International Men's Day, so I thought I'd talk a bit about men's issues. I have done so previously on the channel, but I want to talk about it a bit more. Men's issues, I think they need to not only be recognized, but also addressed. But it's that first part, men's issues being recognized, that's going to be really the hard part because in a society where men are seen as privileged and basically the ones in power. Issues that affect them are either ignored, disregarded, or were lied to saying that they don't exist. Until we kind of get this idea out that men are the ones that kind of rule the world essentially, when especially over the last few decades, it's women's groups that have really been dictating the direction of gender policy. So there's quite a few issues, but I'm going to go into only some of them here. I'm not going to go into them all because there's way too many. The first issue, and it's an issue that I know quite a bit about, and that is men's mental health, male suicide. Men are, depending on what statistics you're looking at, men are they're 3 times or 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. And there hasn't been kind of a political will to try and understand why that happens. Now, if you ask people like feminists, if you ask them why do men commit suicide, they'll give you the same answers. Toxic masculinity, men don't show emotions, they don't talk to people. You hear those all the time, and first off, the fact that they can't define toxic masculinity is a good example of how much BS the idea of toxic masculinity is. And also, something kind of interesting to know here 43% of boys are raised by single mothers. The fathers aren't involved. And most of that is the fact that women are encouraged to be single mothers these days. And also, 78% of teachers are female. So the issue really isn't toxic masculinity. If anything, the lack of masculinity is. But also, something that kind of goes into kind of culture that I want to talk about, and that is this idea that it's on men to deal with that. Men don't talk, and if they did, they wouldn't be committing suicide. But then that does raise questions. Why don't they talk? Or be a bit more specific, actually, because when people say that men don't talk about their emotions, they're actually omitting a section of that statement. Mostly unknowingly, but some do know that they're omitting it, and they admit it intentionally. And that is like the full statement is men don't express their emotions in the same way that women do. We've a single standard for how to express emotions, and that is the women's standard. And if you don't express your emotions like a woman, you're not expressing your emotions at all. Which, if you listen to Tom Golden, the psychiatrist, you'll learn very quickly that that's not the case. Men do express themselves, but they express themselves in very different ways. But when men and boys are growing up, what does society tell them? Society is telling them to stuff their feelings inside, to stuff their feelings of being sad, being angry inside. And that if they do express those emotions, they will not receive empathy. That's the messaging that we're actually giving young boys today. And when that moves forward, is it any wonder that men won't talk when things are hitting them hard? Because, and this is kind of, it is something that annoys me. Boys and men used to talk a lot more about their issues. They've stopped, mainly because they've kind of realized no one gives a fuck. So, yeah, in order for men and boys to start talking again, society needs to recognize about the issues they're talking about. It's not that men don't talk, it's that society just doesn't listen. Now, there's quite a few other issues as well, and it's something that can also needs to be talked about because we constantly hear lies about several issues. One is domestic violence. Domestic violence against anyone is wrong. But there's this blind spot that people have towards male victims of domestic violence that it kind of just shows how anti the people are so anti the male perspective on things, almost to the point when men just don't want to get involved in society anymore. I'll talk about that in a second. But when it comes to domestic violence, men and women perpetrate domestic violence at comparable rates. And this actually comes from the HASC report, the Partner Abuse State of Knowledge Survey. It's incredible. It's not a survey; it's more of a project really. But I will leave a link to it down below. There's a lot in it, a lot of reading in it. So if you don't want to go through all of it, I won't blame you. But to break it down a bit simply, 70%, well, okay, 15% of relationships have some kind of intimate partner violence in them. 70% of those relationships, the violence is bidirectional. They beat each other up. And 70% of that bidirectional violence is initiated by the woman. Something people wouldn't know, but it's a fact if you actually go into the numbers. Of the remaining of the remaining 30% of relationships that are violent, that are unidirectional, now this is, sorry, be a bit more specific. I'm just talking specifically about heterosexual relationships here. I'll talk about homosexual relationships in a second. Of the remaining 30% of heterosexual relationships that are unidirectionally violent, men and women perpetrate domestic violence at comparable rates. So about the same. But yeah, when we look at the media, it's almost always you hear that only men are perpetrators and only women are victims. And that completely ignores the reality. And I think, interesting enough, the homosexual numbers really show that homosexual gay relationships, two men, tend to be less violent, if not just as violent, as heterosexual relationships. They lean towards less violent, but some studies have shown it's still just as. However, every time it's been studied, lesbian relationships, two women, are shown to be at least twice as violent in terms of the percentage of those relationships that are violent. At least twice as many as are violent. So this idea that women don't perpetrate domestic violence just doesn't stand up when it comes under scrutiny. Now there's a lot of other issues. False accusations, homelessness, boys in education, fatherless homes, which I kind of touched on a little bit there. A lot of issues that hit society come from fatherless homes. More likely to be violent, more likely to be in prison. They're more likely to commit SA, sexual assault. They're more likely to be in gangs. They're more likely to abuse drugs. So again, it's not toxic masculinity that's the problem, it's the lack of it. So I think we really need to take a good look at our society in order to be able to understand and deal with men's issues. Now, there are a variety of men's organisations around the world. In Ireland, there's only one I'm aware of, and I have worked with them quite a bit. It's a group called Men's Voices Ireland, and they actually do a good job. I was actually with them when we actually went to Leinster House to talk to the Ceann Comhairle, Sean O'Fargal, which I'm not gonna lie, I was that was a really nice conversation we had with him. One thing that kind of now also when it comes to groups, there's two international alliances that Men's Voices Ireland are a part of, and that are DAVIA, the Domestic Abuse and Violence International Alliance, which has done incredible work. It's endtodv.org is their website. I recommend you go onto it. It's absolutely amazing. But interesting enough, that only deals with domestic violence, but there was quite a push for them to deal with other issues, like male suicide, like false accusations. That the International Council for Men and Boys was established. And it's pretty much kind of the same groups that are involved in it, but they want to deal with a lot bigger variety of issues. And they've done incredible work. And I think they're starting to get people to go, men's issues is something that should be talked about. So that they are doing a lot of great work in terms of getting the discussion of men's issues a lot more into the mainstream. Men have issues, and they need to be dealt with. But most importantly, men are human beings, and they deserve compassion. They deserve empathy.